Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Olarinde. Here's what's coming up on the world today. Palestinians lament new Israeli order to evacuate Gaza city, saying there is no place left to go. Anti-corruption protest in Nepal escalates as parliament set on fire following Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's resignation. Plus, over 20 pensioners killed by Russian airstrike while waiting on a queue in Ukrainian village. Hello once again. Welcome to the program. Palestinians say there's no place left as the Israeli military orders all residents of Gaza City to evacuate immediately. After a night of airstrikes, leaflets rained down over the city showing a map and instructions to leave. The IDF's Arabic spokesman told as many as 1 million people to evacuate southwards, warning that remaining in the area is extremely dangerous. Palestinians are being told to go to Al-Mawasi. It's a small strip of land the military has designated as a humanitarian zone. Israel's plan to conquer Gaza City has drawn widespread criticism. The United Nations has warned that any intensification of the offensive in a region where a famine has already been declared will push civilians into an even deeper catastrophe. The move follows last month's decision by Israel's security cabinet to seize control of the enclave's most populous city. In the meantime, Hamas armed wing, the Al-Qassam Brigade, has claimed responsibility for Monday's shooting attack on the outskirts of Jerusalem, which left 6 people dead. The attackers opened fire at a bus stop at Ramot Junction. Paramedics described the scene as chaotic, with people injured and lying unconscious on the road and the pavements. Israeli media say the gunmen came from 2 villages in the occupied West Bank. Both were shot dead by police, and a 3rd suspect has been arrested. Israel has also ordered the demolition of the men's homes, and Defense Minister Israel Katz says the work permits of 750 relatives and fellow villagers will be revoked. The government argues such measures deter future attacks. However, human rights groups consider them collective punishment, which is a violation of international law. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the scene, calling it part of an intense war against terror on several fronts. We've also seen the UN Secretary General strongly condemning the terror attack.
Earlier today, you saw that we issued a statement in which the Secretary General strongly condemned the terror attack on a bus in Jerusalem, in which at least 6 people were killed and many others injured. He conveys his heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and wishes a full and speedy recovery to those who were wounded.
Let's move now to Nepal, where protesters have stormed the federal parliament building in Kathmandu, with fire and smoke rising from the building, setting the building ablaze. Well, the escalation comes hours after Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli resigned, and that was in response to nationwide demonstrations that had been ongoing. The unrest began over a controversial social media ban, which has since been reversed. However, public anger continues to grow. Over 20 people are known to have been killed in the past 2 days, and Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport has been completely closed. All the United Nations Human Rights Agency is calling for a prompt and transparent investigation into the violence, condemning the killings and the injuries.
Shocked by the killings and injury of protesters in Nepal today and urge a prompt and transparent investigation. We have received several deeply worrying allegations of unnecessary or disproportionate use of force by security forces during protests organized by youth groups that were demonstrating against corruption and the recent government ban on social media platforms. We call on the authorities to respect and ensure the rights of freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. All security forces must comply with the basic principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials. Nepal enjoys a lively democracy and active civic space, and dialogue is the best means to address young people's concerns. We urge reconsideration of measures to regulate social media to ensure that they comply with Nepal's human rights obligations.
Also, the ongoing war in Ukraine, at least 24 people have been killed and 19 others injured in a Russian airstrike on a village in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say the victims were civilians queuing to collect their pensions in Yarova in the Donetsk region. President Volodymyr Zelensky has condemned the attack, calling the dead ordinary people. Well, emergency teams are set to still be on scene, urging residents to evacuate even as Russian forces continue their advance in the eastern region. And European lawmakers have clashed in a heated debate over security guarantees for Ukraine and the country's democratic credentials. Polish member of the EU Parliament, Ewa Hernik, labelled Ukraine ungrateful and a corrupt state, accusing young refugees of partying in Poland and avoiding the war. The German representative Özlem Demirel also criticized President Zelensky, pointing to banned opposition parties and restrictions on trade unions. She argued that EU plans to deploy troops in Ukraine prove Brussels is not seeking peace. The comments came during a plenary in Strasbourg, where EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas defended the European Union's continued support for Kyiv.
Over the weekend, Russia launched the largest aerial assault of this war so far. Putin has zero interest in peace, and he will not stop the war until he's forced to. And this is why the European Union and our member states have provided almost 169 billion euro of financial support since the full-scale war started in 2022. This includes over 63 billion euro in military support for Ukraine. And this year alone, member states will provide more than ever before, 25 billion euro to date. They have now also provided 80% of our 2 million rounds ammunition target. We aim 100% by October. And this is all so that Ukraine can defend itself, defend its civilians and push back the aggression. Europe is also the largest backer of Ukraine's own defense industry through windfall profits from the Russian frozen assets. And Europeans have stuck together through 18 rounds of sanctions against Russia and those who enable Russia's war, 4 in the last 9 months alone. International sanctions have already deprived Russia of at least $450 billion in war funds, including $154 billion in revenues from oil. Europe was one of the largest markets of Russian energy, but not anymore. By 2027, hopefully, we won't be importing any Russian gas and oil at all. The European Union has also sanctioned 444 shadow fleet ships that circumvent our sanctions and bring Russia illegal oil revenues. Ukraine's bravery, backed up by international support, has already prevented Russia from achieving its military goals. But it's not enough. The only option we have is to pile more pressure on Russia, provide more support to Ukraine, and prepare for the day after. And third, we will keep strengthening Ukraine's defense industry, including helping Ukraine produce more military hardware in the European Union. Accession is a merit-based process and Ukraine merits progress. It is time to open negotiations on Cluster 1. The war will end, and when it does, Ukraine will recover and Russia will pay for the damage it has done. Russian sovereign assets should remain immobilized until Russia stops its war of aggression against Ukraine and compensates Ukraine for the billions of euro of damage it has caused and keeps causing. This is what the European Council has stated. It is essential that we deliver on this commitment.
Colleagues, I want to begin by thanking Donald Trump. Seriously, Because this summer, he's disproven once and for all a zombie theory that some in this House have been riding like a dead horse and have been riding again today, that if only we accommodated Putin, only reached out to him, we could have an easy peace. That's what Trump tried, and he failed. He has given everything to Putin. He rolled out the red carpet. He made concessions, and what did he get? Nothing.
Let's take you back to one of our leading stories for today, the shooting attack in Jerusalem, and also the Israeli Defense Force calling for the evacuation of residents in Gaza City. Well, let's bring in security analyst Saul Sadka to discuss this further. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Hello, Saul. Thank you for your time on the program.
Pleasure to be with you today.
Well, let me begin by asking your thoughts on this latest attack in Jerusalem, the recent Hamas attack. How do you think this is going to affect, the ongoing conflict?
The attack yesterday was absolutely tragic, and it's of a piece with what's been happening in this region for 80 years, and a relic back to the Intifada of the early 2000s, when I lived in Jerusalem at the time. I recall on a regular basis, you had bombs going off and shooting attacks. And yesterday was a hearkening back to that time. But what we saw today, the reaction as it is presented by the government here, is a sign of a shift in tone, a shift in the way that Israel will deal with its enemies.
And what does this mean, for the broader security situation? I imagine this attack has, heightened concern and anxiety.
It has, but of course, there is always anxiety in the Middle East on all sides. People are always worried. There is always the threat of violence in the background. But the main thing that Israel has told the enemies that it has in the Middle East is that this will not be allowed to continue. And that if you think that Jewish blood is still cheap, you will pay the price. And as we saw today in Qatar, it might take years for people to pay the price, but Israel will make them pay the price.
Well, let's talk about, the call now for Gaza City residents to evacuate. This is yet another, evacuation order. And how can this, be implemented without really posing significant challenges? And most importantly, balancing the security objectives. How is Israel doing that with the need to minimize civilian suffering?
The suffering of the civilians in Gaza is at the forefront of the Israeli army's activities there since the beginning of this war. There's no question that they are suffering tremendously. Most of them, at this point, I believe, are homeless. The reason they are homeless, and the reason they are suffering, and the reason that hundreds of thousands of Hamas, of Gaza City residents are being forced out is because of Hamas. Hamas has 20 hostages that it's still holding, as well as 28 bodies, and refuses to give them up, even though they are essentially defeated and are merely a rabble at this point. Their leaders mostly died today in Qatar. Even still, they refuse to hand over the bodies and the hostages. And as a result, the war has to continue. Israel has to go house to house in Gaza City to find them. Israel would much rather that Hamas surrenders, hands over its weapons, returns the hostages, returns the bodies, and allows the Middle East to get back to working towards peace, as it was doing 2 years ago before Sinwar set this chaos in motion. The people of Gaza City are certainly suffering, but the IDF are doing everything in their capabilities to ensure that they suffer as little as possible, and that they are provided with food and shelter, and they are being evacuated to a humanitarian zone for that reason, so they can get out of the line of fire, out of the war zone.
All right, then, security analyst Saul Sadka, thank you so much for speaking to us.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
Well, let's take a break now on the world today. Still to come. Or you could call it a Russian retro revival. Classic and customized car festival wows the crowds in St. Petersburg, Russia. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. We're in the United States now, where President Donald Trump has promised a crackdown on what he calls anti-Christian bias. He was speaking at the White House Religious Liberty Commission. Mr. Trump claimed there was a strong anti-Christian bias in the United States, which he says is rarely talked about. He announced the creation of a Department of Justice task force to eradicate the issue. Mr. Trump made the comments at an event held at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
And I created the first ever Department of Justice task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. And for those people that are a little bit naive or not well read, there is a tremendous anti-Christian bias. We don't hear about it. We don't think about it. You hear about anti-Semitic, but you don't hear about anti-Christian. No, you have a strong anti-Christian bias, but we're ending that rapidly, I will tell you. It's a whole... We're in a much different world today than we were 1 year ago. This is like a different world. The Trump administration will have no tolerance for terrorism or political violence, and that includes hate crimes against Christians, Jews, or anybody else. We're not going to allow it. And there was also a horrible killing recently in Charlotte, where I talked about, and so many others, and we're going to get to the end of it. And, you know, when you have horrible killings, you have to take horrible actions.
Well, here in Africa, there are about 8 million people living with HIV in South Africa, and only 6 million of those are receiving treatment. Now, this was revealed at the 12th Annual AIDS Conference held in Kempton Park, Johannesburg. The conference was held under the theme Unite for Change, Empower Communities and Redefine Priorities for HIV and AIDS. Speaking at the opening, the country's Deputy President Paul Mashatile says regardless of the U.S. funding cuts, the government is working to preserve the country's achievement in the fight against HIV.
As government, we acknowledge the impact of U.S. funding cuts on our response. Even so, our government is diligently working to preserve our achievements in the fight against HIV/AIDS. While these accomplishments may momentarily jeopardize our programs, we believe we will prevail. I was happy when the Deputy Minister was briefing me earlier, and he said that despite all these challenges, they are doing everything to ensure that we don't regress. We are now concentrating on augmenting our domestic funding, initiating national campaigns, and exploring partnerships with the BRICS nations and the private sector in our country to address the funding deficits.
And finally, on the program, classic and custom cars took center stage in St. Petersburg over the weekend as enthusiasts gathered for the Original Meat Festival. The annual event, which has run since 2015, showcased retro vehicles, restoration projects, and 1970s American-style customs, all set to the backdrop of garage rock music. All participants say they have been returning for years, bringing freshly restored vehicles to display. Visitors noted that this year's festival felt bigger and busier, with twice as many cars on show. The event ran from September 6th to 7th and attracted thousands of fans of retro cars and motorbikes. And that's it on the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.